Let me read to you again our opening words that came from Jack Kornfield, who says, "Each time we meet another human being and honor their dignity, we help those around us. Their hearts resonate with ours in exactly the same way the strings of an unplucked violin vibrate with the sounds of a violin played nearby." Psychology has demonstrated this phenomenon of mood contagion or limbic resonance. If a person filled with panic or hatred walks into a room, we feel it immediately. And unless we are very mindful, that person's negative state will begin to overtake our own. When a joyfully expressive person walks into a room, we can feel that state as well. So today, somewhat by request, there was a little request like, let's learn a little more, talk a little more about cognitive dissonance. How do we work with cognitive dissonance? I know many of us have been plagued by this, either in our personal interactions or watching this on the world stage. And then there was a little mention in a previous service about limbic resonance and the study of limbic resonance. And so I thought, since it's about to be May the 4th, and you know that sounds like May the Force be with, then we could do a little talk on Jedi mind magic, how to use the Force to overcome cognitive dissonance, because here's the trick, using force doesn't work. Have you noticed? Using force doesn't work. You have to use I can't make an F like that, force, okay? You got to use the force, not just force. So this is what we are into today. Let me screen share a little image for you. If you were watching sci-fi movies back in the late 70s, you will remember the iconic scene. Here, can you see there's Luke Skywalker and his mentor, Obi-Wan Kenobi, the desert hermit, and they're trying to get out of town. They've got like important save the universe business to do. And you know, the bad guys stop them. And Obi-Wan is like, he's like, "You don't have a problem with us. These are not the droids you're looking for. Move along." And he like hypnotizes them. He flash hypnotizes the folks who are stopping them. And they say, "These are not the droids we're looking for. Move along." And so this was the 1977 iconic scene of how one uses the Force to influence the minds of others. If, like me, Star Wars came out in May of 1977, I wasn't born until September of 1977, but I got on board in 1984 when Return of the Jedi came out, and young Luke showed that he had mastered this same quality. You're going to have to watch the movie on your own to see that. So this was this idea that influence the mind of others. Now, my point in today's sermon is not to convince you that you have this power to mystically turn, what did they say in the Muppet movie? Now I'm remembering other things from the 80s. Turn your mind into pea soup. But something more radical, a more radical proposition, that we are actually on some subtle level always influencing the minds of those around us. It's not necessarily with a magical hand pass and that they're going to say, but that we are actually always influencing the minds of those around us in a subtle way. So that's what we are about today. Jedi mind tricks, the power of limbic resonance to work with cognitive dissonance. Okay. So I remember recently, one of the things that really baked my noodle, and it's from an audiobook, so I didn't go back and find you the page, but you can read the whole audiobook if you want, which is Kelly McGonigal's Science of Compassion. And she cites a study in there. I'm a little fuzzy again, because I love a book that you can flip the pages and go, there's the citation. I don't have that for you, but it's in there. I remember it. Where the subject, the one they're observing, they're somehow observing their stress response, right? They have them come into this waiting room. And across the room is this other person who looks like they're just reading a book, right? And the person who's reading a book at random intervals is going to beam compassion to the person that they're measuring their stress response. And by some unknown subconscious means, we don't know exactly what the mechanism of action was, but when this one over here was beaming compassion, this one over here, the markers of their stress response dropped. I don't remember if it was galvanic skin conductance or cortisol or something, but for somehow, not having the person come over and say, hey, honey, oh, I love you. How are you today? Oh, you look great. Not that. They're just over here. Where's my prop? Hold on. I've got plenty of them around here. Let's find a big one, though, that looks tomish. Helps my ministerial street cred if you have a tome. They're just over here. And then at random intervals on the inside, they're going, I love you, I love you, I love you. And somehow the other person is picking up on it. Okay, was this olfactory cues? Was this peripheral vision, like some kind of, we don't know. We don't know exactly what that was, but an interesting, weird phenomena going on. Okay, on what this means, the point I'd like to make to you, and there's a lot more research on that, but that's just the weirdest one I know of, is that on some subconscious level, we pick up emotional cues from one another. This, I think, is not too hard to swallow. These are generally not being delivered to our conscious mind, but the whole process unfolds in an invisible dance from subconscious to subconscious. So anytime we're with another person, the way we're built, the way our minds are built, is that we're subtly picking up on their emotional state. And without thinking about doing that, unless you've trained in that, we're translating that into our emotional state. Okay. I'm not aware of research on olfactory cues in humans except outside of romantic situations, except in romantic situations. But there is a great deal of research by people like Paul Ekman and the Gottman Institute on how we're affected by each other's micro expressions. So micro expressions are these tiny things. I mean, sometimes we register these consciously, right? You're having coffee with someone, you say a trigger word that you didn't know was a trigger word, and you see them like do a little disgust or resentment face or something, like just for a brief flash, and then they're so polite. Apparently, this is actually the subtle negotiation that goes on between humans all the time. And our primate brain in here is much better at picking that up than our neo-human brain up here. And so it's all going on under the radar. Okay, tiny facial expressions, fleeting facial expressions that we don't consciously pick up on. And all this micro level information leads up to the sense of a vibe that you might pick up from a person. We know this because naturals at emotional intelligence have the ability to pick up these vibes and then emit cues from themselves that can calm others down. We also know this in that people who are trained to kind of like sniff out danger, you can watch the popular TV show Lie to Me with Tim Roth that was based on Paul Ekman's work about using this in like courtroom environments and things like that. So really very interesting study. One name for this wordless communication is limbic resonance. The term was pioneered in a book called A General Theory of Love, where the authors describe it as, quote, a symphony of mutual exchange and internal adaptation, whereby two mammals become attuned to each other's inner states. So a symphony of this inner exchange whereby two mammals become attuned to each other's inner states. And of course, if you watched my sermon from 2 weeks ago, you'll know lately I'm all about the Darwinian survival of the kindest. This idea that why Homo sapiens has succeeded so well, many agree, is because we learned to read each other's emotional states and we became an emotionally intelligent animal that allowed us to work together so adaptively. Empathic resonance. So another term for this is empathic resonance, sometimes even empathic distress. Empathic distress is another cool thing that I learned about from Kelly McGonigal's book, actually, which is it's the first state in developing compassion. Compassion, you know from the Latin, maybe you don't. I assume everyone's a nerd because I project my own nerdhood on them, excuse me. But compassion from the Latin means cum, with, and passion, suffer, to suffer together. empathic distress is where that really comes into play, because you have to feel the other person's pain before you can generate compassion for them. Now, compassion requires that you also then separate yourself from that and feel that as a separate individual, you can do something to help that. But empathic distress is the first stage. So we got to be able to feel together. We got to be able to vibe together. Okay, as mammals and hominids, this empathic resonance is our great strength. The limbic system, that's this low road part of your brain, is the emotional center of the brain, and this allows for mammalian bonding and mutual care. The social instincts which Darwin thought of as Homo sapiens' greatest strength. We can see this as well in the necessity for close relationships if an infant is to thrive. And we can see it in things like how laughter is more intense if the other people around you are laughing. That's why it's more fun to go to a comedy club than to watch it on Netflix. But it's also why they invented laugh tracks, because they found audience response to TV shows where you knew when humans were supposed to laugh. The audience response was stronger. They liked the show more because we're a social, empathically resonant type of animal. That's you. This is limbic resonance, this subconscious mammalian attunement process. Okay, what about cognitive dissonance? That's not yet cognitive resonance, but that's empathic resonance. Then we have cognitive dissonance. So dissonance obviously is the opposite of resonance. And this seems like, cognitive dissonance seems like the exact opposite of limbic resonance. Cognitive dissonance seems like the exact opposite of limbic resonance, but spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you today that it's not. So, have you ever tried to have a conversation with someone mired in cognitive dissonance? Let me look at the faces. Have you ever tried this? And it's like, it's just the worst. Yeah, so it can be a dreadfully tedious exercise of willpower to persevere through such a conversation. Cognitive dissonance is simply the tendency to hold on to one's position despite evidence to the contrary. Even worse, cognitive dissonance can bring with it the backfire effect. Have you heard of this? The backfire effect? So cognitive dissonance is the dig down, the bunkering. And then the backfire effect is even worse. It's like if you had a bunker that every time it got fired upon, it magically went deeper. That's the backfire effect of cognitive dissonance. You've noticed this, right? It's one of the most frustrating parts, that the more good evidence you offer, the deeper they go in their resistance to rational thinking. These are real problems if we want to live in relationships and a society where we have mutual exchange of information and support for one another. So cognitive dissonance seems like quite the opposite of any kind of empathic resonance. How does it work? Well, oddly, cognitive dissonance is all wrapped up in your survival circuitry. Basically what happens, okay, an ego is a weird thing. An ego is a weird thing. We've got this sense of self, which works pretty good a lot of the time, right? This keeps us taking care of our family and going to the store and paying our bills on time. You need a functional sense of self. Then we also associate a number of ideas with that functional sense of me, right? Well, who's me? Well, I'm a guy who thinks like this. I've done this all my life, and this is my stance on the world. The challenge with that is if someone questions your idea, if you think that idea is me, then the fight for your idea is a fight for survival. And your brain is wired so amazingly that it picks that up. And the prefrontal cortex part, the thinky-ish part of your brain can tell the survival-y part of your brain, the way down past the mammal part into the reptile part, that we're under threat here, right? From a thought, you can create a whole cascade of fight or flight stuff in your body. And so somebody comes and says, hey, I think your idea might be incorrect. And you go, well, I'll kill you first. Whoa. It's this major switch that gets tripped, and we don't even know what's happening. For our own selves, I'm not too proud to admit that I sometimes too have cognitive dissonance. I'm sorry. And so for my own self, I need to learn some Jedi Aikido, right? We use the Force for knowledge and defense, but never for attack. Beware of hatred, anger, and suffering. You gotta learn this to be a good Jedi and a happy, flexible human being. Okay. Cognitive dissonance happens when we become so identified with an idea that we associate it with our sense of self. Then there's this amazing misfire that happens in our brain. If someone attacks our philosophical position, we experience it as if they're attacking me. And what ensues is a full activation of the fight or flight response. Okay, here's another opportunity to learn some terminology about your brain. Daniel Goleman calls this type of response an amygdala hijack. An amygdala hijack. So the amygdala is a big piece of this emotional part of your brain. And what this is you know this has happened, right? Because okay, I know you're not, well, some of you might be enlightened, but we're all pretty emotionally mature, I bet. And I bet you can still even get triggered. Even you, Unitarian Universalist types, can still get triggered once in a while. And you know, the worst part about being triggered is if it goes full amygdala hijack, the compassionate, empathic, like abstract thinker you were 2 minutes ago is gone. And now you're kind of just a Rottweiler, right? This is because the emotional brain takes over all the circuitry, and that's why he calls it amygdala hijack. And what do we say when this is over? You know, a couple weeks may go by and your friend goes like, how are you? You really went through a state there for a minute, didn't you? And you say, oh, I finally feel like myself again. It's because yourself, our sense of self, our higher sense of self wasn't in control. We got hijacked by something. So just a little terminology to play with. It makes sense then, doesn't it, why someone in cognitive dissonance can go from an apparently reasonable modern human to a cornered animal unwilling to explore other perspectives. Just in a moment, we thought we were having human talk, but now we're having an animal off or something. In the worst cases, these animals will raise their voice, use name calling, threatening gestures, or even become physically violent. And we can understand perhaps where that comes from if we understand how cognitive dissonance is a survival response. It seems as though there's no emotional resonance going on here, but there is a surprise. Part 3. Ooh, I did it today. Thesis, antithesis. This is synthesis. Classic philosophy, my friends. Classic philosophy. Let's do it. It turns out that a big portion of cognitive dissonance is all about limbic resonance. This is why the experts tell us if you want to help someone out of cognitive dissonance, such as like the work people do with deprogramming from cults, you need to treat them gently. If you want to help someone out of cognitive dissonance, you need to treat them gently. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? If cognitive dissonance is related to fight or flight response, we would want to make sure that we're not giving the person signs that they are under threat. This is actually well known in terms of education. Our brains work better to pick up and store new or complicated information when we are relaxed and at ease, perhaps like our ancestors would be, hearing teaching stories around the communal fire. Unfortunately, while this makes sense to us conceptually, creating an open and soothing environment is usually the last thing on our minds when confronting cognitive dissonance. Why is this so? Because the type of things we get cognitive dissonance about are often religious or political belief systems that might cause harm to oneself or others. So I think we know conceptually, and we've got these UU values, inherent worth and dignity, blah, and then someone says something that's like, our survival circuitry goes like, dude, you're just gonna like keep us in a pandemic cycle forever. Are you serious right now? And all of our great conceptuality about like, oh, peace and love, let's exchange ideas, it's out the window when we're in that situation. Or somebody says an idea that we think will harm them. And instead of being able to take the mind of an, oh, this is a teachable moment, isn't it? We go right into, you know what, buddy? You're wrong. You know who's right? This guy over here. So we forget, because we've gone into fight or flight. This is what I'd love for you to know, that it's not wrong that we feel this way. It's that our survival circuitry has been triggered. And guess what? That's your empathic resonance with them. You're picking up on the fact that we thought we were in a philosophical idea exchange. We're actually in a survival exchange right now. Okay, it makes sense that we'd feel a sense of urgency when we try to communicate with someone expressing these views. They're triggering our survival circuitry. We're worried about the good of our tribe or nation or world. We're worried about our own safety or even the safety of the one expressing the dug-in view. So what I want to share with you today is that this limbic resonance is going on the whole time. And don't get swept up. Don't let them be the main attractor. Don't let them Jedi you into falling from your knowledge. This is a teachable moment. We can share heart to heart. I can make space to embrace practically anyone while still keeping us safe. And don't fall down into a primate battle of wills for whose ideas get to survive. I watched this week Neil deGrasse Tyson's masterclass on scientific thinking and communication. And I wanted to share some cute ideas with you. I may run a few minutes over time. I'm sorry about that, but pop off if you need to, and I'll talk fast. Okay, one, he said, here's an example. Somebody comes and they say, I've got this crystal. Oh, I don't have one. Oh, I've got this crystal here, and it'll heal you with energy. And he said in the masterclass, I just love this. He said, two possible responses here. One says, oh man, really? How much? And you fork over your money. And the second response is, you crazy fool, get out of here with your crystals of crazy. Both of those, wait, what was the language here? Both of those, that's the language I wanted, are intellectually lazy responses. Both of those responses are intellectually lazy. Instead, he suggested, well, what type of energy does it emit? And how would one go about measuring that energy? Really, what type of illnesses does this crystal heal? Well, how do we know? Has there been any research done on this? Are there any case studies done on this? Really, I'd love to know. And all of a sudden, instead of two intellectually lazy choices that reduce empathic resonance, you have a whole list of questions that don't require you to buy the thing or call people epithets related to mental illness or wellness. Instead, you can hold your positions of concern for people's safety while still engaging in a value exchange of ideas and compassion. Whoa. Okay, he also says, imagine we've all probably got in our family an uncle somewhere who violently disagrees with climate change or something like that. So another tactic, he says, how are we going to learn this stuff? How to, like, dealing with cognitive dissonance without getting cognitively dissonated ourselves, decimated, I don't know. He says, practice in advance. How would you speak to this person using these ideas of questions and curiosity to present your own views, question their views, but without inducing their fight or flight response or acting out your fight or flight response? And so he says, instead of saying, no, you're just wrong, what's it called? Climate change is a thing. Believe science. I mean, I love us for our slogans that will get our team on board when we preach to the choir. But when you use those to others, they actually will tend to have a backfire effect. We got to learn some if we want to be a force not of increasing polarization, but decreasing polarization, we may need to learn some ways to speak the language of those we're talking to rather than simply raising our voice because they don't understand ours. I hear you. You don't think climate change is real. What about sea level rise? Would you feel comfortable buying a home somewhere where the sea level is rising? Hmm. What do you think about the increase of hurricanes and extreme weather events? Are you comfortable buying some property? What do you think is causing those? And you can begin to have a discussion where you get some airtime and you don't further invoke the backfire, bunkering, and polarizing instinct. Conclusion. We didn't go too far over time. What it boils down to is the limbic resonance thing. We're more attuned than we know. Dr. Dan Siegel even refers to this as our interpersonal neurobiology. What this can mean is that if you come into a conversation with a need to prove yourself right or bring the other around to your way of thinking, guess what they are most likely going to be concerned with? That they're going to be concerned with proving themselves right. And you get it, right? Okay. On the other hand, some of us have had those miraculous experiences where we've managed to change our own state to a more open and accepting one, like mid-course, and we saw how our conversational partner followed suit. It's happened to me often enough that I've become convinced that there really is a science to this that we could learn to master. In this case, I will say to you, believe science. My hope is that we can make these miraculous occurrences more commonplace. We can train so that instead of making our differences something that leads to stonewalling, backlash effect, and greater division, we can make it an opportunity to understand each other more deeply. Even when our viewpoints don't get any closer, we'll at least have done our part to share from the heart. The truth is that the most effective form of teaching is always by example. When we try to shout another down and bully them to our side, they don't learn our arguments, but they do learn bullying. If we want our arguments to have any room to land, we must first teach the primary lesson, that it's safe to let down our guards and learn together. So this is our talk on limbic resonance, cognitive dissonance, and how to use real life Jedi mind tricks. And so, in the spirit of those teachings, those wisdom teachings that were brought onto this earth in May of 1977, I say, may the force be with you.